My name is Paula Horowitz. I am the Executive Director with the Climbing Wall Association, and I'll be playing host and moderator for you guys today. So before we dive into introductions, I would just like to draw everyone's attention to the chat feature of our Zoom call today. Any questions or comments that you might have as we go through our Q&A and our discussion with our panelists, please use that chat feature. Drop those questions and comments in there. We'll be monitoring that. If those questions and comments can fit right into the panel discussion, we'll be sure to address them as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we've carved out some time at the end of this discussion where we can get to as many of those questions as possible. So please do use that chat feature. If you're unsure of where it's located, just hover your mouse over your Zoom screen and you'll see a menu appear at the bottom. You'll have a little chat box. Just click on that, and to the right, it should appear on your screen for you. Feel free to introduce yourselves there, where you're calling from, excuse me, where you're joining us from. And again, any questions or comments as we go through. While you guys are doing that, I'd like to take just a quick moment to introduce our panelists and thank them specifically for joining us today to share their expertise and their passion that is driving the GYMSAct forward. So we'll begin with Congressman Don Beyer, U.S. Representative out of Virginia's 8th District. And Representative Beyer is joining us today from a family vacation. He's carved out time to join us because he's just so passionate about what this act is promoting for our industry. So we'll learn more about that here momentarily. We are also joined by professional climber and industry advocate, Sasha Digiulian. Thank you, Sasha, for joining us as you come back from an epic trip up in Alaska. Additionally, we have President of Sport Rock, Lillian Chow Quinlan, who is joining us overseas today from a very different time zone. So thank you for joining us and staying awake. I don't know how many cups of coffee it's taken you, but I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And last but certainly not least is Executive Director of the Access Fund, Chris Winter. So those are our panelists this afternoon. Again, thank you for joining. And we are going to just dive right in. One more quick reminder to utilize that chat feature so that we can be sure to answer as many questions as you have as we kind of navigate the nuances of the GYMSAct. So I'm going to begin with Representative Beyer. If you would take a moment just to share with us your connection to the industry and why the GYMSAct resonates with you.
Well, thanks, Paula. I feel completely intimidated describing my connection to the outside, surrounded by the many superb climbers that are on this call. But my first climbing experience was on Outward Bound in the winter in 1971. And since then, lots and lots of time at Sport Rock and at Carter Rock. And although I've mostly transferred it into over 1,800 miles on the Appalachian Trail, which is very little technical and lots of scrambling. But I love the climbing and love being part of the Access Fund and the American Alpine Club and lots of other good stuff. And by the way, the simple thing is the GYMSAct is so important for us to continue to thrive, to grow old gracefully. I saw the other day that 40% of our COVID deaths last year were people with diabetes. And diabetes is directly connected, obviously, to too much food and too little exercise. So I believe that while it's been very good for Peloton, the coronavirus has been terrible for the many, many gyms that we have used throughout all of our adult lives to stay young and healthy.
Thank you. Is there any particular part of the GYMSAct, Representative Beyer, that really piqued your interest and made you want to really be an advocate and to be a supporter of this?
Well, I think that the biggest thing, Paul, is realizing that gyms were hit as hard or harder than almost any other industry, on the parallel with restaurants or worse, because people were afraid to go into, intimate facilities where you're working hard and you're sweating, and it just seemed like a dangerous place, whether it was or not. And so, but there's an enormous need. Everybody talks about COVID-19 being the weight that they put on. that there's this enormous need for us to get healthy again as we eventually get out of this pandemic. And so gyms creates the resources for so many gyms that are, on the verge of not being economically viable to come back, to be renewed, to be ready for making us all healthy again. We just saw American lifespans shorten again. It's a terrible thing, and it has everything to do with not just the pandemic, but with the way we get a chance to exercise and nurture our body. So this is a big step in the right direction.
Thank you. And we'll dive into some of the details of the GYMSAct here shortly, but I want to pivot just a little bit over to Sasha. Sasha, can you share with us a little bit of your background and why the GYMSAct really connects with some of your advocacy efforts?
Sure. Hi, nice to see everyone, especially you, Representative Beyer. And I've known Representative Beyer since I was very young, and I started climbing at Sport Rock in 1998 when I was 6. My brother had a birthday party there, which I think Representative Beyer, you were probably there for. And the GYMSAct resonates for me because, as a climbing advocate and a passionate, enthusiastic outdoor climber, climbing gyms have been part of the backbone of my entire life. Like, climbing is where I cultivate my sense of community. When I was growing up, my community really was at Sport Rock, and it's where I felt like I was at home and had this really awesome group of people that I could connect with through movement. And movement is something that is so essential to our health and wellness. Paula, you mentioned I was on an epic trip in Alaska recently, and what I noticed there was it was actually really wet and it was really rainy, and we didn't actually have too much movement some days because we were on a boat and it was like kind of being trapped in a cabin. And there's a neurological connection to moving around that makes you feel good. And so I think that that's something that we as a society need to cultivate and really support, is how can we be a healthier nation overall, and also support the gyms that have really suffered through this pandemic. Because while our nation was suffering through this illness that was spreading around, what's so important for us to be actually healthy is being able to have places to recreate.
Thank you. You bring up some really interesting points, both Representative Beyer and Sasha, that this really is a community that is founded on meeting the needs of physical activity in a really unique way. And you both touched on the fact that the COVID pandemic has affected nearly every industry in a variety of ways. And the indoor climbing industry specifically is not immune to that, if I may use a pun for a moment. And there's a lot of stats and a lot of information out there that really shows how much this industry has been impacted. And this GYMSAct is being put forward to help supplement some of the financial burden that these indoor climbing gyms, our members and more, have experienced. And there's a lot of government aid out there right now, but you can see here just a little bit of a snapshot of how this has impacted. When the CWA did some research and some outreach to our members, we asked a few questions about how this pandemic specifically has impacted opening, expansion within the industry, things of that nature. And you can see here just the drastic impact. Some of our members were saying they weren't sure, 24.7% were not sure if they were at risk of going out of business. The good thing is that you can see a lot of our members were able to find ways to push through. But more importantly is the expected membership and how it's affecting the individuals that are walking through the door here. And that's really a point that I think this GYMSAct can help in terms of continuing to substantiate the industry and grow this industry forward. It's getting our members back in the door, getting our staff, many of the gyms, and Lillian, you can speak to this here in just a moment, how your staff and your ability to staff your facility was impacted during this difficult time. So Lillian, if you don't mind sharing just a little bit, what was your experience as a gym owner during the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Paula. I would say that my story is not unique in that so many of us gym owners went through a similar journey, some, more hard hit than others. And I have nothing but the most respect for all of the gym owners who had to navigate through something so unknown, unprecedented. I will say that having the CWA as a resource and having, weekly, if not twice a week community calls was something that really, I think, connected us all together so that we didn't feel alone. However, when before the pandemic, our gym was doing very well in terms of, first of all, we are one of the oldest climbing gyms in the country. We've been around for 27 years, constantly evolving, constantly keeping up with industry standards, if not trying to innovate and do new and exciting things, as rock climbing has become one of the fastest growing sports. And we've done 4 expansions, and then boom, the pandemic hit. And I think for a lot of us, it was quite a shock, and just slamming on the brakes and stopping everything and really looking deep into what your company is about. What are your priorities? One of our main core priorities was to take care of our employees. Because I have always been steadfast that they are the ones who make the company what it is. And so I quickly applied for not just 1, but 2 PPP loans, a grant that was generously offered by the city of Alexandria. And for me, I was very fortunate to be able to pay all of my employees during our 3-month closure and throughout, and did not have to furlough or lay anyone off. That being said, we had no programs. We had no need for employees, and that was really hard. And it was hard to stay connected to our employees who weren't coming into the gym, especially when we were closed. And I think that's true for many gyms. And it was something that's just been something that's been hard to navigate. And without the GYMSAct, I doubt we're going to have a 3rd round of PPP. We don't know what the future will hold. I think that's going to be a very tenuous position for gym owners to be in, as to what are you going to still prioritize your employees once they have now come back. Secondarily, your community, our climbing community is, they were really put to the test in terms of, what does community mean for you and your gym? And that's one of our pillars that we have worked on over 27 years. And they came through, and many of our members, probably like many gym owners, had members continuing to pay their membership dues while they were closed. But that may not be the case going forward. So, we also had to curtail all of our programming. Birthday parties are non-existent. So there were so many, and yet your costs, your expenses, your rent is still there. So while revenue, was drastically impacted, your expenses are still there unless you were, had the good graces of your landlord to give you some kind of rent abatement. So, while we are not out of this, we are recovering, but the pandemic was something very challenging for everyone, especially as a small business owner.
Thank you. And Lillian, we'll circle back to you in just a moment. I know as a gym owner, there's a number of questions that you probably have that can speak to the community as a whole about how the GYMSAct specifically supports the fitness industry and the indoor climbing industry. But before we do that, I'd like to bring Chris into the conversation. And Chris, it goes without doubt that the pandemic is not just affecting our indoor climbing walls, but that reverberates out to the outdoor industry as well. So why do you find that, or I should say, where do you find the importance from the Access Fund's perspective in this connection between indoor and outdoor climbing?
Yeah, thanks, Paula, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And Congressman Beyer, thank you so much for joining us today. Here at the Access Fund, we're all about promoting sustainable access to the outdoors and conservation of the climate environment. It's so important. And as Sasha mentioned earlier, climbing gyms are such a central community hub for the climbing community overall. I mean, so many of us now can look back on 10 or 20 years of our lives and just think about all the time we spent at a climbing gym, training, getting stoked to climb outside, finding climbing partners, planning trips. I mean, it's a real source of community connections. And we also know that climbing gyms are going to be critical points of contact for us and for climbers to learn about low impact climbing behavior, to get excited about conservation and stewardship of climbing areas. And so we need the climbing gyms around the country to help us share out these core values as our community grows over time. And rest assured that the community is growing. It's growing quickly. We all see that. And during the pandemic, we especially saw that in places like where Sasha and I live here in Boulder and other places where people had such amazing access to outdoor climbing areas. There was a real boom of people going outside, and it had a real impact on the land that we care so much about. The second point is just that gyms are a really important way for us to connect with youth and the next generation of climbers as well, to make sure that they're also going to pick up the mantle and actively take care of those outdoor spaces that we care so much about. It was a different time back in the 70s and 80s when people were getting into the sport with one-on-one mentorship. And now the Olympians of tomorrow will come from the gyms. All the folks who are going to be the customers for the brands and our brand partners will come from the gyms. And equally as importantly, hopefully, all the people that step up and show leadership and take care of our incredibly fragile and valuable places will also come out of the gyms. And so for those reasons, it's so important for our gym community to thrive, for us all to be working closely together, and for us to really jointly share out stoke around the importance of conservation and stewardship across the community, both indoors and outdoors.
Thank you so much, Chris. That partnership is, the value cannot be expressed in words. So we're grateful for you joining us today. Really quickly, Lillian, before I turn it over to you to just present some questions about the real meat of this GYMSAct, I would just like to remind those that have joined us today to utilize that chat feature. This is where we're going to get into the nitty gritty. So any questions that you have, please use that chat so we can make sure that we get answers to those and we are as transparent and clear about the value of and the importance of the GYMSAct as we go through. So Lillian, I turn it over to you to pose questions and seek answers as a gym owner as to how the GYMSAct will help benefit an owner as well as the industry as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. You know, to be honest, until Garnet contacted me, I really knew very little about the GYMSAct. I thought that all resources were already exhausted. I didn't know that there was something very unique to gyms. And this is not just climbing gyms, but the fitness industry in general. And, you know, when you hear about this call to action and asking gym owners to do something, you know, personally for me, I was like, oh, one more thing for me to do, you know, and yet on the other hand, on the other perspective of this is, what if we didn't have a GYMSAct? And what if we are not on the complete other side of this pandemic? And you can see what's going on in the world right now. We are not finished with this pandemic. And what resources will be available to us, you know, through the government, should we, you know, have another, you know, reverting back to capacity, you know, issues and masking and all of those things that, you know, we have all been through in the last year and a half. And I think that now that more than ever is when you have, I feel like now I have a responsibility and I have, you know, a moment to say, you know, my voice does count. And I am a gym owner and we're so many gym owners and operators in the country. And, you know, if we can actually rally together and actually have a bill passed that would be specific to our industry, you know, that's something that gives me just this sense of like, okay, there will be one more thing that I may be able to lean on if my gym, is going through yet another rough wave. And, with all of the government funding that I've received, that has been more helpful, but it has been only about, surviving. It's not about thriving, and it's not about moving forward. As you saw in the statistics, gyms that want to, to expand and grow in the industry and grow the sport, we're still at a standstill. We're all just trying to make it. And I really believe that this GYMSAct could be something incredibly powerful for all of us, to think that there would be something dedicated to us, would be, as a gym owner, I'm thinking that would just help so much, whether we need it or not, it will be there. But if we don't come together and actually act, it won't be there. And so that is where, my mind is kind of like, meeting right now. Yes, we have members returning, but we also have members who are still apprehensive. The Delta variant is creating another wave of people just kind of not coming in, and we are being extra cautious about our programming again, that we are, increasing the instructor to climber ratio. So, your costs go up and people aren't taking as many classes. So, we're doing, we're trying to be as creative as possible, but I wouldn't say that we're thriving. And I think the GYMSAct could be something that we can lean on to help us, one more step, with all of these unknowns of the future.
Thank you so much. I'm going to call on Representative Beyer for just a moment. Can you take us through just, bare bones, what is the GYMSAct and why did you decide to support this?
Well, thanks, Paul. The GYMSAct, interestingly, runs very parallel to the Restaurant Act. My pal, Earl Blumenauer, who's a great outdoorsman from Portland, had led it. I was trying to hang on to his coattails. And it was recognizing that restaurants, even though many got the PPP loans that Lillian talked about, were still in really deep trouble. So we were able to get something GYMSAct-like, specifically the Small Business Administration with a big grant fund. Interestingly, it all got used up in about 3 days because there was such hunger for it. So what with the GYMSAct is just parallel to it. It recognizes that indoor gyms, like restaurants, had a peculiarly, that COVID had a greater impact on it than it did on many, many businesses. My family runs car dealerships. They went on without a beep. Everything was fine. No one got laid off. Customers kept coming. That happened with lots of folks, but not with gyms. So it sets up, through the Small Business Administration, yet another grant program, not a loan, but an outright grant to gyms that qualify, that have had some, really hurt by COVID. And with the Delta variant, it's not over. Everywhere I go in Northern Virginia, people are wearing masks to get inside. So there's still going to be fear, and there's going to be a great need for this. We have 2 big bills in play right now. One is this bipartisan infrastructure bill that came out of the Senate. That's not going to be a vehicle because we're not going to be able to touch the way the senators put it together. But there is also this reconciliation bill that's now $3.5 trillion, which is an enormous, enormous amount of money. And that we will, next week on Monday or Tuesday, we'll pass the rule, which is the first part of getting that thing passed. And then we'll begin to put all the pieces in. By September 14th, we have to have into our respective chairs, on the Ways and Means Committee, for example, the specific requests that we want. So we've got to make sure that the GYMSAct is in there through Education and Labor, through the health committees, through the Ways and Means Committee, and is included in the $3.5 trillion that hopefully will pass sometime this fall.
You mentioned the bipartisan support of this. What does that mean, and how does that help a bill such as this get moved forward?
That's complicated, Paula, because on the one hand, if this bill were going to just normally pass, which rarely happens on Capitol Hill, having it be bipartisan is a wonderful thing. When other members, Democrats and Republicans, see this bipartisan, everyone relaxes and says, this must be a good bill. And sometimes you can even put it on the so-called suspension calendar. However, when you're spending a lot of money, it's tough to keep it bipartisan. And that means it's almost certainly going to have to be in the reconciliation bill, which sadly is not going to be bipartisan at all. We can't getting 60 votes in the Senate for anything is very, very, very hard. It's like, you know, I don't know, 513 point whatever. So it's much more likely that we goes on a partisan basis, but we actually get to be law. Many of my Republican pals too, they were in this vote no, hope yes posture. They want it to pass. They just can't vote for it because of the dynamics of the Washington politics.
So we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of being involved here in just a moment. But Lillian, I'm going to move back over to you for a moment. You touched a little bit about you know, the ways in which the stimulus can impact your gym. Would you like to expand on that at all?
Well, I think that right now, you know, and in the near future, we just need to meet our communities where they're at. And right now we have such a spectrum of where people feel comfortable coming into the climbing gyms and what they want out of their experience at the climbing gyms. And, you know, to help us prepare, having the GYMSAct, you know, will allow us to continue to pay our employees and keep them on board. It will allow us to offset some of the loss of memberships of people who haven't come back. It will help us also to, you know, continue our programming and our youth programs because it will, you know, again, you have to adjust numbers to, you know, to comply with either guidelines or just to ensure that you are running a very as safe, quote, and healthy a program and gym and facility. You know, you also probably need to make upgrades. I know we're looking into different ways to upgrade our HVAC systems and filtration systems and all of those things. And, you know, that will not happen without additional support and funding, you know, outside of our own facilities and what we've been able to get with that, you know, all the support that we've been able to have. So I think that, you know, this is a really important moment for all gyms, but especially for climbing gyms. I mean, we are a very small piece of the pie of fitness industry. However, if you haven't been watching the Olympics, I think that was one of the most watched sports of all the new sports in the Olympics. And I've seen an uptick of people coming into the gym, you know, but conversely, I've seen a lot more people terminating their memberships and freezing their memberships because of what's going on in the world. So I see a dramatic and very important impact in having this GYMSAct passed. And you know, oftentimes climbers, you know, do their own climbs, send their own climbs, measure their own progress to what they do themselves. But, you know, at this moment in time, we have an opportunity to really come together and do something big for our industry as well as the wider fitness industry. And we talk about the mental health aspect. We talked about the physical, you know, components of having sports and rock climbing in particular, but you know, we also have learned that mental health has also become, you know, very much in the forefront of problems that we're having due to COVID. And I have talked to and climbed with many members who are so grateful that we have reopened because of the mental benefits of being able to be back in their community and to be able to do the sport that gives them that, you know, experience and for them to continue all their pursuits of what, you know, rock climbing brings to them. So having to close down again is just, it's a horrifying thought for my team and me. You know, whatever comes down the pipe, it's kind of like on-siting a route. You just need to go with it and find a way. But honestly, having some support and having some data does not hurt at all.
Thank you. You know, Chris, I want to bring you into the conversation a little bit. Of course, the Access Fund works diligently on advocating and promoting a variety of things. How does this bill, how does this act compare to other pieces of legislation that you guys have supported, and what makes it unique?
Yeah, well, let me just say one thing. I just want to add in one thing about the value of climbing gyms because it's such a cool place. And, you know, what climbing gyms have done over the years, I think, is really introduced a pretty wide spectrum of people to climbing in general. And also through that, outdoor recreation more broadly. And so climbing gyms are really having a measurable impact on increasing and promoting diversity in the climbing community, which is a real benefit to all of us. And so the industry, we want climbing gyms to stay affordable so that folks can continue to access climbing and to experience that, folks from all backgrounds. And so the last thing we want is for, climbing gyms to have to raise prices or to have to avoid growth in order to stay in business. We want that to be affordable and accessible for everybody because it's such a cool experience. And so many people are getting access to what we all love so much about climbing through the gyms. So that's a really important piece of it. I think there's an important diversity and inclusivity overlay to supporting climbing gyms around the country, especially the smaller gyms. So, one of the things that's that this bill shares with other successful efforts in the past is that it promotes recreation. Outdoor recreation has had a huge moment in Washington, D.C. over the last couple of years. There have been 2 public land bills that have passed with bipartisan support in Congress at a time where everything else was particularly divisive. Those 2 public lands omnibus bills also had provisions in there for climbing. And climbers like Sasha and others went to Washington, D.C. and lobbied for those bills. And those efforts were really successful. And so outdoor recreation in general is having a moment in Washington, D.C. over the last few years. And indoor recreation offers all the same benefits. It's connected to outdoor recreation. It creates jobs. It supports small family businesses. And as Lillian said, it's good for our physical and mental health. And so the GYMSAct shares a lot of the components of successful efforts over the last couple of years that we have been a part of. And that's one of the reasons that we're so excited about the GYMSAct and helping to share out some support and excitement for the gym community.
Thank you, Chris. Sasha, as an advocate in the industry, why is it important that gym owners and other key players, key stakeholders in this industry get involved with the GYMSAct?
Well, I think it's important because like Lillian and Chris and Beyer mentioned, climbing is really great for mental and physical health. And if we see this as the collective, where this community that's growing and gym owners are having to take these major steps to not only stay open while there's limited business, but also invest in the resources to make these facilities even more adequate to withstand the changing tides of COVID. And so I think if we see this as we're all in this together, as athletes, we want to get into the gyms. As gym owners, we want to keep our businesses open. As a nation, we want to prioritize mental and physical health. So I think it's a no-brainer. Like, we need to advocate for this. I don't really see any reason not to be quite honest. And I also think that, if we're prioritizing restaurants, if we're prioritizing, right now we need to look inward and say, what do we prioritize, I guess. And I think as a nation, we need to prioritize physical health, because that a lot of people that I know have anxiety from this pandemic. And it's because the world is really uncertain. And like, sometimes the things that are certain is getting to return to your community and getting to have this return to normalcy of the places that we love to go. And I think that that's the way to kind of beat the fear that's associated with the pandemic as well.
Thank you, Sasha. Representative Beyer, how can gym owners and climbers support your bill? Will more letters from the public health? Are there different avenues to consider?
Letters help. Phone calls help. I think most offices like mine keep a running count of who's for and against a given bill. But the best piece of all, wherever you are, is going to go see your local congressman, your local senator. And either one. So if you're in Boulder, you go see Joe Neguse or whoever it is. And if you're in Alexandria, come and see me. Because that, it really wakes people up. There are so many bills out there and so many different requests that the ones that you can personalize immediately go to the top.
So just a little additional question to that. We had a question posed in the chat here, and we have an individual that's joined us today that is interested in how this GYMSAct may position the industry favorably in the future. Will this help position the indoor climbing industry favorably in the future? What is the benefit of this outside of just the here and now?
You know, I was reading the Stone Age Climbing's chat about the MERV 13 filters and 0 cases of transmission and 200,000 visits. It seems very parallel to the argument that the airlines have made pretty successfully, that your most dangerous place is in the airport, but you're pretty safe once you get on the airplane. If you can get that message out and maybe use the GYMSAct or the debate about the GYMSAct to get that out, that could be a great long-term win for gyms. Because as Stone Age Climbing says in the very beginning, a lot of people were perceiving, including governors, because I had a lot of conversations with Governor Northam in Virginia, were perceiving gyms as dangerous places, when in fact they may be just the opposite.
Thank you. Chris, I'm going to ask you to chime in here a little bit as well, since you have a well-rounded idea of how some of this legislature impacts our industry specifically. What have you seen, or what can you share with us about the power of getting behind one bill and its trickle-down effect on a larger scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have in the outdoor industry especially, and this includes climbing gyms, I think way more political sway than we give ourselves credit for. We really do have the ability to go to Washington, D.C., connect with our elected representatives like Congressman Beyer, express our voices and get things done. And Sasha's seen how that happens in Washington, D.C., coming to climb the hill with us over the last many years. It's actually amazing and fun to watch it happen. And so I think that we can save America's climbing gyms. We can help get the GYMSAct passed. And it will be one more example for all of us to celebrate as to how we can come together as a community and act on our shared values and get some really cool things done. It's really amazing and a fun thing to be a part of. And so I really hope that folks will see this as one more opportunity for us to do that as a community, and then to build off of that in the future as we try to share all the amazing things that climbing and outdoor recreation has to offer.
I'm going to stick with you, Chris. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask the hard questions now.
Yeah.
Obviously, the CWA is thrilled to be working with you and partnering on this. What exactly can our climbing gyms do to get behind this bill?
Well, as Congressman Beyer said, the best path to victory is through the reconciliation package that's being negotiated right now. And so the most important thing we can do is to reach out to all of our elected representatives to ask that this be included in the reconciliation package. And time is of the essence, because that's all happening as we speak in real time. And so Access Fund has lent our advocacy platform to this effort. And all climbers around the country and all gyms can go to our website at accessfund.org and click on the Take Action tab. And it'll say Save America's Climbing Gyms as the top active campaign on our platform. And so everyone can fill out that simple form, and those letters will be automatically sent to both of their senators and their district representatives. And so all of us as individuals can do that. And the climbing gyms around the country can also share that opportunity out to their audiences and their communities as well. And we're really proud to be able to partner with the Climbing Wall Association in this effort. And it's, like Congressman Beyer said, one of the most effective things we can do is to express ourselves and our voices to our elected representatives. And now is the time that we need to do it.
Thank you. And Chris, thank you for touching on the 2 easy access points, going directly to your website. And then the CWA, in support of our members, have put together a media kit that will make it that much easier for you guys to cut and paste or take whatever pieces of that best fits how you communicate with your members. the support of this act does not just have to come from business owners and, you know, key stakeholders in the industry. Our climbers are the ones that have a loud voice here as well. So again, the CWA has put together a media toolkit. There's social media elements in there. There's email marketing toolkit and other suggestions. Easy to access, easy to download. Again, the Access Fund website has that real quick, easy click. Immediately it will be filtered to the appropriate representatives to up that awareness and sense of urgency as well. As Chris indicated, there's a time limit on this, and we need to be acting now, and we need to take advantage of that. So thank you for that information. I'd really like to encourage anyone that is listening in today to drop your questions into that chat. We are getting real close on our time here. Again, Representative Beyer has taken time away from his family vacation and trudging along the Appalachian Trail to join us today. So we want to get as much of his knowledge and expertise before he's out of the area for a day or two. The same case for Lillian out in Greece. I think she needs a nap here soon. I think actually bed, if I'm not mistaken, it's past midnight now. And Sasha, I'm sure, has some planning to do or recouping to do following her time in Alaska. So if you don't have questions, that's fine. The CWA team is available to answer questions at any time, as is the Access Fund. If you take a look in your chat, you'll see that we've dropped some important links in there. A direct link to the Access Fund's advocacy tool has been dropped into that chat, as well as the media kit put together by the CWA. So if there are no other questions, I just want to extend my sincerest thanks to all of our panelists for joining today, as well as all of our guests for joining and seeking out information and being supporters of this act, even just asking the right questions, becoming knowledgeable on what is happening that impacts our industry and sharing that out. Any questions that come, please, please, please reach out to us directly. We'll have our contact information here up on the screen in just a moment. So Representative Beyer, thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your vacation. Lillian, I bid you adieu so you can get some sleep. Sasha and Chris as well. I'm so, so grateful of your time. Thank you very much.